Happy New Year, everyone. Hope everybody's been having a great one so far. I know myself personally, I was dealing with a rather nasty head cold between Christmas and New Year's, so it kept me from getting my video out last weekend, and I wanted to get a video out on what I got planned for my layout for 2026, which is going to involve doing my scenery work. I don't know about you guys, but I was ready to say hasta la vista to 2025. Something about that year, just one thing after another. I started out with having the worst case of the flu I've ever had in my life in January, and it was just one little sickness thing, unexplained, after the other, until I got the head cold there, and it started improving and things started getting better closer toward the beginning of the year, and hopefully that's an indicator that I'm going to have a healthier year now. So I can get back here on the layout and get things done. And before I could get started, the first thing I do is paint and ballast my track. And the last video I did where I ran these GP9s, I was having an issue with this particular set here. Running in this direction specifically, it would derail right here at this curve every time. And it was kind of a mystery to me. I've been running quite a few different engines in here without any issues, and didn't really notice anything standing out until this set here was, I was trying to run it, and it would derail. It really didn't explain why it would derail. In fact, I was really surprised at this particular set, because I've run some Williams Train Masters in here without any issues, and these are Williams GP9s. I mean, they're very similar. They got dual can motors with traction tires. Wheel span might be a little bit different, but that may have been the difference between the two. So it wasn't until I got this table cleaned off and got to running this set around and realized what the problem was. It was pretty noticeable real quick once you got down here table level. And turns out this track was just a little bit higher here. And since this is joined to a turnout, it's hard plastic, so there's really no give of that track. So it was creating a situation with a low spot here and a high spot there. There was enough deviation in that track. It was giving this particular set of GP9s trouble. I've ran some other Lionel GP9s in here and didn't have that problem, but that set really didn't care for it. And it was good that I discovered this before I got too carried away in here and got too much scenery work done. And so it wasn't really that big of a deal to fix it. I had to pull this section of track out because these ties were setting on this board, this filler board. And what I did here, I put this filler board in back here before I put my fascia board on back when I did this. This has been that long ago I've done this. Like this side here, I extended the edge out a little bit to give me a little bit more clearance from the edge of the table. I did that on both sides. And, I flushed it here on this end and flushed it on this end down here when I put this board on, and probably left it intentionally high here with the intent to put pressure on this and force it down. It was only maybe a quarter inch, a little bit high, but that doesn't sound like that's all that much. But in that tight of a span right here, this tight of a radius, that's quite a bit of deviation. And, it was something that apparently, because of this foam track bed was over, I must have overlooked and forgot about taking that bow out before I screwed it down. So it really wasn't that big a deal to pull this up and just take a wood chisel here and just plane that down to the tabletop. And then I was getting ready to run the engines around here. It's pretty evident that I ended up finding another issue I didn't know I had. You can see it runs through there just fine now. And then I noticed this other issue. And right here where these tables join, I put these in over 5 years ago, and this bump wasn't here. So I ended up with a high spot right here. And it wasn't all that high, but it was very noticeable if you sit there and watch the trucks go over. It wasn't so much noticeable with engines running through, but when you start fixating your gaze on something like that, then you can't help but look away. And when I was running it over, you could obviously see those trucks going over a bump, so that wasn't going to work. And then while I had this track out right here, it's pretty simple to go in here and just take a putty knife and lift that up because, well, I painted this. I'm going to mention that real quick. You guys, if you're doing your tabletops, you want to paint these, especially if you're going to do like track road bed or any gluing any foam product down. I do use that Aleene's tacky glue, and it does a really good job of holding that down. But if you ever want to hope to get this back up where it's not going to come up in pieces, you don't want to really probably put this down to a bare wood surface unless you plan on taking a lot of time to get it off of there. So it's real easy afterwards with a putty knife, if you paint that prior, just to lift that real quick, and then I was able to just get under there with a wood chisel and plane that out real quick. And then I did glue that back down without painting it, but it's just that little strip area. So it's just going to make that section much better. And then while I was at it, I also extended my insulated outside rail. You can see I put these insulators in here. You're not going to see this because this is all going to get painted anyway. So this section of my track is my insulated outside rail section that controls this signal. So this is what triggers it. The wheels on the train is my switch that turns this signal on. And so what it does, it gives me some advanced warning here. These poor guys here at the light didn't really have much of a chance with the train triggering there before it hit the crossing. So I wanted to extend that a little bit. So now I got a more extension on each side, kind of a uniform from each side of that signal, and it's going to work in both directions. It's going to give me more advanced triggering, and it's going to create a longer delay when it gets through there. So I was glad I was able to take care of that. So now that I got that all taken care of, I'll be able to get here in here on my scenery work. I've got plans for, I want to do all these different scenery techniques. I've got some rock and dirt, sand areas and static grass areas, all just taking place in this area alone. So quite a bit going on in here with different scenery techniques. And I'm kind of excited about trying them all. I've never done a lot of it, so this is kind of part of the hobby that sparked my interest to be able to try all these different scenery techniques out. And so I'm looking forward to that. So that's what I got planned for the new year, is really getting all the scenery work done on my layout. Now that I got my track in, run my engines. That's a good idea, to run your engines. It's something I've never really completed the track near as far as do anything permanent, just because it takes a while to try to figure out with your track work. It's like you throw your track down and the buildings are an afterthought, so to speak. So you're trying to incorporate and work in both your track plan with your structure layout and still have a certain amount of cohesiveness to it, to where it tends to work with each other. So it's just one of the challenges of doing the layout, and it seems like like your structures are kind of an afterthought, and it kind of can cause you a problem with your track work trying to do that. And that's why it's taken me so long to really get the track work done in here as far as painting and ballasting. Just because until you get all your structures, these structures, it takes a while, unless you're just made of money, to acquire the necessary structures over time to be able to even figure out how you want to do your layout. So that's another part of the hobby that's that can cause delays. Well, I thought this would be a great opportunity to do a little run-up session and usher in the new year with these Lionel 2026s. These are post-war models that were issued in 2 releases during the post-war era at Lionel. The locomotive here on your left and the one in the center, these versions were the first release of these, and they were released from 48 to 49. The second issue would be this locomotive here on my right. These were released after 1950. These were issued from 51 through 53. And if you're looking for a good introductory medium-sized locomotive to enter into the hobby that is fairly well detailed for a post-war model and economically priced, I think this would be a good choice. These tend to have very smooth operating motors, and they are pretty much trouble-free. So other than, your initial servicing, just because, well, they're old like me, you need to give them a little bit of love. So these particular locomotives were modeled, the boiler was shared with the 1666 that came out before these. They were issued in 46 and 47. They differ from the 1666 in the fact that, well, these have smoke units. Now your 2026, all of them, no matter what year they were issued, came with a headlight, a 3-position reversing unit, and a smoke unit. So those are all features that are things I look for when I'm looking for an engine from any era, really. And if I'm looking for a post-war model, well, magna traction is high on my list. So, that's kind of what checking my boxes is: details, smoke unit, and magna traction. So if you're wanting a nice detailed locomotive with a smoke unit that may be lacking magna traction, well, this is your model. Because unlike some of the other 50s models, the 50s version of the 2026 never was produced with magna traction. So no version of the 2026 has magna traction. So for that reason, that narrows it down for me to the 48, 49 issue of these, just because, well, they have the nickel rim drivers, and that's a plus. And of course, you're not going to find nickel rim drivers on your 50s models with magna traction because, well, they had to remove that for the magna traction. So it's not like you're going to find a locomotive that has both nickel rim drivers and magna traction. So it made it easy for me to decide which model was the best option for me when I was looking at these. And of course, the 48, 49 version won out. And so we'll take a look at these details here a little bit and see the difference. You can see we got wire handrails on this particular model. It's got the eccentric crank for a complete valve gear and the nickel rim drivers. And of course, our 50s models is lacking all of that. So these were never equipped with handrails or the eccentric crank. And of course, they didn't have nickel rim drivers and they didn't have magna traction. So if you're looking for one of these, I think I would put my money on these. These are pretty economical to run into. That's why I say they're really a good introductory into the hobby. If you're looking to break in the hobby, especially if you're wanting to go post-war. And just because I find the motors in these to be pretty silky smooth. It seems like your post-war models that were issued between 46 and 49 tend to have very smooth running mechanisms in the motor. So they take very little care. These are something that other than just your routine maintenance, they're pretty much trouble free. Now, the difference between the 48 release and the one issued after 1950, also in the mechanical aspects of this, your 50s models here was released with this smoke piston with the crank lever. And that's pretty typical of most of your 50s models that has a smoke unit. That's what drives your puffing smoke. Whereas these 40s models really have a unique mechanism. I don't know that I've seen it in any other Lionel locomotive anyway. It's actually got kind of like a cantilever or like a half a teeter-totter. It's not really like a cam like your 671 turbines, but it's similar to that. So it's actually got almost like a catapult, and it's got a shaft that protrudes through the frame into this drive wheel. And apparently, I've never pulled the wheel off, but apparently the wheel must have a cam lobe in there. And when the wheel rotates, it actuates the lever. Now, it must do a little bit better job in some degree of maybe moving air, because these tend to smoke even at pretty low speeds. So more so than a lot of other locomotives. And then it tends to puff the smoke out quite high. So it's got a very good action to it. I have never had really any issues with it jamming up like I do sometimes with these crank levers. Sometimes these crank levers can get hung up due to the fact of smoke fluid building up. I think creates gets down in the piston and can kind of, I think sometimes create like something similar like a vacuum where it hangs up your piston in there, which I don't really seem to ever have that problem with these locomotives, the ones here from the 48 issue. These locomotives were actually modeled, shares the same boiler casting as the 1666. There is some slight changes they made to the boiler to distinguish the two. It could be easy to confuse this from a 1666, I suppose, if you're not that familiar with them. But the things that differ is this has an extended sand dome. That's different on the 1666. It's a little bit smaller oval shape, where you got a lot larger square-shaped sand dome. And then these were changed by adding this radiator box on the front of the pilot. Tandem Associates refers to that as a feed water tank, but I don't believe that was a feed water tank. I think that was an intercooler for your air brakes on the locomotives that came out, I think, in 69 from 1869 from Westinghouse. And so feed water tanks would be like your Elsco up on top here. There is a Worthington style, which would be more like what would be on the side of our 2025 here. You can see this right in here, all of these pumps. That's really what your Worthington style would be. And they actually, this locomotive here, I've never noticed it before, it's actually got some casting here that's different than this shell. You don't have it on your 40s version here, but here it is on the 50s version. So there is a difference between the casting of these two boiler shells. So that's the first time I've noticed that. So it's always good, to kind of look your locomotives over. You might find something out that you've never seen before, even though you've had them for years. So I thought it would be fun to use these to do another little demonstration. I've heard some people talk about how it's impossible to get these AC open frame motors to run very slow, just because, well, they lack the necessary inertia to overcome torque. And while that's true to a degree, more so than a can motor, I think what I'd like to do is try to dispel that myth and see if I can get these to run not only slow scale speeds, but to start out slow and remain that way. And to make it a little bit more challenging, I've consisted these with some pretty heavy consist. And you can see, although this doesn't look like that many cars, these are all post-war cars. These are pretty quite heavy. In fact, these have full coal loads with die-cast trucks, many of them with electric coil couplers. And so that's going to add to the difficulty. And then we're going to take this older one here that's more beat up and actually try to start it out on a curved radius. And then to make matters even more challenging, if you watch my video on how I install and condition my track, we're going to do this on track that hasn't been cleaned in over 5 years. That's right, I haven't cleaned this track in 5 years. So that means we'd be starting it on dirty track. So let's just see, is this track dirty? What do you think? Oh no, I'd call that dirty. So we're going to see if we can get these to run without the locomotives having magnet traction or traction tires. In fact, there's really not any cross hatching left on the drivers, and they're all wore down and as smooth as glass. So we got basically slicks on these locomotives. So we're going to try to make this a little bit more challenging here by doing this. Now, this locomotive here on my left, it's in pretty rough shape when I bought it, and I've done a lot of work to it just to be able to get it to run. This was kind of a basket case. The plan was to completely restore it, and I did give it an oil bath to see if I could do some improvement there, and I got that far and decided, well, I'm just going to leave it, and I'll have a naturally aged locomotive. I mean, this thing probably spent most of its life in an attic somewhere, and it had a lot of problems, had some bent axles, and it was just locked up. It was a basket case. So I got it running again with a little bit of work. This locomotive, when I bought it here in the center, was pretty much trouble-free, and didn't really take too much to get this locomotive going. This locomotive has really kind of a special place in my heart, I guess you might say, just because, well, it's my first ever Lionel steam locomotive. Plus it had 6-wheel drivers on it, so it was kind of a big deal for me. And I never had a locomotive before that had a whistle tender. All my locomotives up until I got this one was Marks. And so this poor locomotive, when I bought it from a train show. It was in pretty rough shape when I got as far as wear. It was pretty well used up. It's got bad gearing on it. And, and I didn't help it any by running the wheels off of it myself. So we're going to try and see if we can get it to run. It took a little bit of work before I did the video here just to get this thing to running. I kept having the gears lock up on it. So I don't know if we're going to be able to run it or not, but we're going to give it a try just to see. Now, just in case you want to get the whole set, these 2026s were sold in typically 4-car freight sets. They came with this 6466W whistling tender, or the 6466T non-whistling tender, a 3451 automatic log dump car, your 6465 Sunoco tank car, and either a 6454 Atchison Topeka Santa Fe boxcar or a New York Central style boxcar. And then the 6357 SP caboose. Well, I thought I should introduce you guys to these guys, and they are kind of hard to keep track of sometimes. And, all these have smoke units in them, but they still have their original pellet style smoke units, but I do use liquid smoke. And this locomotive here on my left, well, it's my best ever pellet smoker. So this is smoky. And this engine here in the middle is full of mischief and causes me all kinds of problems, especially when I'm not looking. Well, this is Loki. And since we have a gearing problem with this locomotive, I've got to be very careful when I run it. So this is Pokey. So everybody, I want you to meet Smokey, Loki, and Pokey. Okay, let's give this a whirl and see what happens. I don't know, guys. I think that was pretty successful so far. Well, they're running pretty slow. They started slow and they're running slow, so I think we dispelled the myth. Keep our fingers crossed here and see how old Pokey does. Oh yeah. Oh no, so far so good. I can't believe that's running actually. Wow, that engine's actually running. That's hard to believe. The gears on that were so bad that it was locking up, and all I did was file them a little bit, put it back together, and I can't believe it's running. I don't know, that's still smoking pretty good right there, and it's running pretty slow. I don't know what's more impressive, that they still whistle and smoke going this slow, or that they could go this slow. Let's get them wound up here a little bit. Oh yeah, we got some smoke output going now. We can slow them down a little bit. Let's try running these this speed, see how long it takes.